So for more on the looming decision, we're joined by Alan Andrews, also in Vancouver. He is a lawyer and climate program director with Ecojustice, a charity that fights for environmental justice. So Alan, there are lots of people saying the government will approve the expansion. We should find out in less than an hour from now. If that's the case, does this once and for all ensure, do you think, that the expansion will go forward?
No, I don't think this is the end of the story by any means. Ecojustice has been fighting to enforce environmental regulations, and particularly to safeguard the killer whales that call the BC coast home. Our clients have fought tirelessly to protect that species, and they're not going to give up now. So we'll be looking over the decision very carefully to see where we go next.
So tell me a little bit, because the government has said, you know what, they have, today, for instance, there's an exercise going on spill response, that there are new vessels, that there is a new plan to, if there were to be a spill, to deal with that. Is what the government is proposing just not good enough?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what they come forward with. But the problem is, it's not just oil spills. There's also the problem of increased noise and the risk that killer whales will be struck by the higher number of ships in the sea. So we'll have to look very carefully. The bottom line is the safest way to stop driving the endangered species towards extinction is to not approve this project. The government can either fulfill its legal duties to protect this iconic endangered species and respond to the climate emergency, or it can push this pipeline through. It can't do both.
Interesting that you mentioned the climate emergency. Do you think it makes sense for the expansion to be approved, given that the government has said there is a climate emergency?
Well, it makes absolutely no sense to declare a climate emergency and then literally hours later push through a project which will have major implications for climate change, both in terms of the emissions in Canada and also the emissions overseas when this dirty bitumen is burned. Just as the science is telling us we need to wean ourselves off dirty fossil fuels, the government is locking Canada into a high carbon emissions trajectory.
What do you say, though, to others who say, look, this oil is being moved? It's being moved more and more by rail because there's not enough pipeline capacity. Rail can be and is often more dangerous in terms of derailing trains, that pipelines are actually safer.
Look, the bigger issue isn't how we move this dirty bitumen around. It's about weaning ourselves off fossil fuels and moving towards a cleaner future, a healthier future based on cleaner technologies and cleaner fuels. The bottom line is this project will drive an endangered species further towards extinction and send us in completely the wrong direction in climate change. Just as all the science is showing us, we have just over a decade to halve carbon emissions and then get to zero emissions by 2050. There is no room in that scenario for dirty fossil fuels like bitumen.
So if the expansion project is approved, what will your organization, what are the next steps in terms of the fight against it?
Well, the next steps for Ecojustice and our clients is to look very closely at the decision, look at any conditions that have been attached to it, to see if those safeguards are good enough to protect the southern resident orca. If not, we're quite prepared to go back to court, but we'll have to wait and see.
So what do you say to others who say, look, we're still going to be burning fossil fuels for the foreseeable future, that this can be done in a way that is responsible, that helps create jobs? There are a lot of different groups in the interior of BC that are in favor of it. There are some Indigenous communities also in the interior of BC and Alberta that are in favor of this project, that they feel as though they've been hurting economically over the last few years.
I can't speak for those groups. I can only speak for our clients, Raincoast Conservation and Living Oceans, who are fighting to protect the southern resident orca. Regardless of all those other factors you've mentioned, endangered species regulation exists. The federal government has an obligation to protect endangered species like the killer whales from extinction, and we'll be looking very closely at this decision to see if it does that.
All right, Alan, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Alan Andrews, an environmental lawyer with Ecojustice in Vancouver.